Welcome to the RAISE workshop at the topics of the importance of financial education in the school system. I myself am Aarya Dave, a junior at Aarya High School and an officer at RAISE Global Foundation. I personally am interested in studying business, finance, and economics in college, so I was super curious and interested to moderate this event and to learn more from our incredible guest speakers. So let's start off with a few words about our speakers. First off, we have Dr. Wesley Harris, who is a member of the North Carolina House of Representatives and representing District 105. He is the only PhD economist in the NC legislature. He has put his skills and experience to use building an economy that is not only poised for great growth, but one that works for every single North Carolinian. His work emphasizes on quality education, smart infrastructure, affordable healthcare, and even tax cuts. Next, we have Ms. Jennifer Delahara. She is a graduate of UNC Chapel Hill and of UNC Charlotte, where she received her master's in education with an emphasis in teaching English as a second language. She worked for many years in her schools as a family literacy instructor for Central Piedmont Community College, also known as CPCC. She was elected to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Board of Education, serving at large. Then we have Ms. Cynthia Bush, who is a faculty member of the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, also known as UNCC. Before being invited to join UNCC's finance faculty, she was a financial service executive for 20 years at TIAA. This is where she oversaw $25 billion in corporate investments across the capital spectrum, including private equity, high-yield bonds, project finance, and even commercial real estate. She is currently an officer of the board for women executives for community service and for the Kane Arts Center. Ms. Bush graduated from Howard University in Washington, D.C. with a BBA in finance, and she earned her MBA from Columbia University located in New York City. Last but certainly not least, we have my mom, Deepika Dave. No one knows my mom better than me. She's the most hardworking and dedicated person that I personally have ever met. With 2 young kids at home, she put herself to college to get a degree in civil engineering. Just in case some of you didn't know, not only did she go through one of the hardest majors at UNCC, but she did this while taking care of me and my brother while we were just little kids at the time. I would still remember that she would do most of the household chores around the whole house, and after she put us to sleep, she would go upstairs to do her homework and study for her classes and finish her engineering projects. As you can see, my mom was not a normal person. Sometimes my dad, my brother, and myself would call her the robot mom because she worked so hard, which we thought was humanly not possible. Currently, my mom is the founder and president of RAISE Foundation, and she runs the Beyond Feminism page on Facebook to empower and to support deprived women.
Thank you, Aarya, for the introduction. Respected ladies and gentlemen, welcome and thank you to our valuable guest speakers, Dr. Wesley Harris, Jennifer Delahara, Cynthia Bush, and all participants for joining us tonight for this event of the importance of finance education in the school system from RAISE. We are proud and privileged today to have the opportunity to have you all in this session. Hope everyone is safe and doing well. I'm Deepika Dave, the founder and president at Rising Ambitions of Young Society. That's RAISE, R-A-Y-S. I'm extremely proud to have founded the RAISE Global Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit organization, in May 2019 last year to educate, engage, and empower young people to build a support network on financial literacy, drug awareness, and women empowerment in the USA and India. Hundreds of girls and women, boys and men have benefited from our programs and campaigns on gender equality and women empowerment in India. We do not make only women aware, men too. RAISE believes that women and men complement each other and do not compete. Their difference is not a problem, it's a solution. We provide free tuition to the kids in slums in India who are underprivileged and marginalized. During this pandemic time, we provide valuable information on different topics of financial literacy and women empowerment via webinars and online meetings in the USA and India. With financial literacy as a charter program, our mission is to empower young people during critical development period of their lives. RAISE provides financial literacy workshops that have a highly defined purpose to promote financial awareness and stability in the young people's lives, and especially girls and women who need to have necessary life skills to negotiate key life decisions. We want to bring improvement in the financial status of needy young adults through ensuring easy accessibility and better finance system. If we forego the opportunity to work with youth, we forego the opportunity to improve the world. RAISE Global Foundation has a very deep insight for the younger generation to help become successful in their social, cultural, financial lives and live a happy, peaceful, purposeful, and successful life. While financial education is important, it is only one pillar of an adequate financial policy to improve financial literacy and access financial services. Financial literacy is important because it equips us with the knowledge and skills we need to manage money effectively. Without it, our financial decisions and the actions we take or don't take lack a solid foundation for success. Failure to adequately socialize young people for adult financial roles is costly at both individual and societal levels. When they turn 18, we give young adults the full rights to make contracts, obtain loans, secure housing, work full-time, and fight for their country. All of these very adult responsibilities are financial choices. Yet, far too few of these young people are ever taught to manage money. Although there are many financial literacy skills that have importance in modern society, lacking financial literacy can be very damaging for an individual's long-term financial success. Unfortunately, research has shown that financial literacy is very common with FINRA. FINRA is Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, has estimated that some 66% of Americans lack financial literacy. So, Dr. Harris, knowing the facts, the North Carolina state governor has signed a bill on July 8th last year, making finance course a graduation requirement from this year in high schools. We are so excited to learn more about it. How do you feel about this new bill, Dr. Harris? And what outcome and future do you see in the students?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, thank you so much for inviting me to join y'all. It's great to meet you, Aarya, and also you, Cynthia. It's good to see you again, Jennifer and Deepika. Thank you so much for setting this up. No, this bill was very good. There are a few complicated feelings on it, and I'll get into that. I know Jennifer will talk a bit of that too, but the underlying principle is great, and that's why I voted for the bill of just having kids to understand kind of the dynamics of financial literacy, and mostly just the time value of money. Because I know when I was in high school, I wanted to go into business and economics. That was one of the passion of mine. But like, I had struggle understanding the stock market, what the stock market meant, like what drove the price up now, what that actually meant, and certainly had no idea whatsoever about managing money, savings accounts, 401ks, or just the cost of debt in general. Luckily for me, my dad was a banker, and so he was very financially responsible and just kind of handled all that again while we were in high school, and then when I was in college, to make sure that I didn't do anything foolish, because I simply did not know. And it's shocking the predatory behavior that particularly a lot of credit card companies have on college freshmen. When you go to college, you're an adult for the first time, and you're on your own for the first time in many situations. And one of the first things you're going to get when you walk on campuses, there are going to be credit card offers just going around you of just being like, hey, sign up for this. We'll give you a couple months 0% interest. And it baits a bunch of young college students who aren't accustomed to making these financial decisions, to making very poor financial decisions, and that can straddle them with debt that will take them a long time to recover. And even the same thing, just choosing college in general, just where to go to college. Like, you can get into a myriad of schools, and a lot of people will be just willing to offer you money to go. But again, you need the knowledge to understand the strings that are attached with that money. Just because I get a somewhat lucrative financial aid package through student loans doesn't mean that that's perhaps the best deal for me. And if I have to borrow a ton of money to go to a private school that I really want to, is that really the same trade-off of going to maybe a public school or maybe a community college where you don't have to go as deep into debt? And that is why it is so important that we have this in high school, to understand that when you borrow money, when you buy something on credit, when you get your student loans, what the true cost of that is. Understanding the time value of money is that, okay, they're giving you a bunch of money today, but you are going to have to pay back much more than that. And to understand that there are different things that you want to borrow money for. For instance, if you're going to borrow money for something that is going to be an investment like your education, that's one thing, where you're spending money to make yourself more profitable in the future. Those are good forms of debt. You know, that's why we encourage people to borrow money to go to school, but you have to make sure it's worth it. But if you're borrowing money just to kind of make that extra level of consumption today, that's a little more dicey, because it's going to end up costing you much more in the long run. And so it's a bill that I think we really do need, because again, when kids are, again, this happened to me when I was in high school. I got into the two schools I was contemplating going against were UNC Chapel Hill, public school in North Carolina, and Wake Forest, private school in North Carolina. And growing up not being a particular big UNC sports fan, I really didn't want to go to UNC that much. And then my dad sat me down one day and he was like, listen, he was like, you can go to Wake, but if you go to Wake Forest, you will graduate with about $100,000 in debt. And it will take you probably 30 years to ultimately pay all that off. Or you can go to Carolina and your mom and I can help you out, and you'll probably end up graduating debt free. And that was a decision that changed my life, because the ability to graduate debt free is just, and even I didn't graduate debt free, because I ended up going to graduate school and took out some loans when I went to graduate school. And it was, again, it was just 2 years ago, I think, that I finally paid off my last student loan, and I didn't even have that considerable amount of loans. And so it was just a weight off your shoulder to have that, because again, like when you're making the decision in the present, it doesn't seem like much. Like, oh yeah, I can just pay that off. But when hundreds of dollars a month are going into paying off your bills that you accumulated 10, 15 years ago, that's hard to get your head around. And when you finally get to able to stop that, it's important. So that's why it was so critical we were able to pass this bill. One of the complicated things that has happened since we passed it is our Department of Public Instruction has put it into the social studies curriculum, which actually crowds out one of our U.S. history requirements, which is troublesome because our kids need to know as much history as possible. And so I would have preferred that course been in kind of the vocational studies that we have to go through, instead of crowding out a very important subject like U.S. history. And so that's something I hope that we can work forward in the future. But having this bill is and having this requirement in our high schools is going to be very, very important for our kids to understand how to make good financial decisions, so that they don't go back to haunt them years later in their lives.
Yes, Dr. Harris, I agree. Finance education is important in schools because there was a survey done by US National Jumpstart Coalition that said that students who attended high school personal finance courses were poised to do better on the the National Standardized Financial Literacy Test than those who did not attend these courses. A strong foundation of financial literacy can help support various life goals such as savings on education or retirement, using debt responsibly, and running a business. So, Dr. Harris, let's now talk about financial psychology. If people behavior is analyzed, it reveals the psychological barrier that affect their financial decisions. Can money change one's personality? Why is financial literacy important for students so that they don't become victim of financial fraud?
Absolutely. Money can 100% change someone's personality. Money does 100% change someone's personality because it changes how you make decisions. Because again, we are in nature, most of us are fairly risk averse. That we're going to be cautious, and when you're kind of acting in that way, there are always going to be trade-offs. Of every time I make one choice, it's costing me another choice because I can't make that. And so having a lot of money kind of eases that kind of restriction. And so you don't have as painful of trade-offs. And so when you don't have as costly of trade-offs, you're bound to make different decisions than you would have made otherwise. And so that's one thing of, again, when particularly young people, when they're presented with, again, early on, as soon as they graduate, with these like huge student loan packages where they're like, yeah, absolutely, I may only be 18, but I'm going to pay for my tuition and have maybe $35,000 a year and just spending money to go by. And it's just, at the time, it seems like it's really, really great. And so you don't recognize just how costly it is to repay that until you're in it. And so that's one of the critical pieces of making sure that we understand the trade-offs, and teaching financial literacy is a really important process in helping people just make good decisions, just understanding exactly how costly things are in the present so that they can make the smartest decision possible. And again, that goes back to all their decisions. Again, even when, again, not only choosing what school you're going to go to and how expensive it is, but also choosing what major you're going to go to. Again, you have to look at the earning potential of the jobs that you're looking for. And if you're going to have a job that is probably going to pay you $40,000 to $50,000 a year max, then maybe don't invest in a $100,000 a year private school that it's going to take your entire life to pay back. And so just explaining these things earlier on as they're learning to deal with this money, I think is a critical aspect to making sure that we do make the best decisions possible. And we aren't left with, again, that can help everybody. Because again, I think one of the biggest problems we have with our current millennial cohort, which I'm on kind of the upper end of the millennials, is, again, a lot of us aren't buying homes right now. Because again, so many of us are saddled with this undergraduate debt, which again, like, the debt isn't necessarily bad because it allowed us to go to school and become educated, but that's a whole generation where we're going to be spent paying off that debt instead of, say, investing in real estate, instead of investing in housing and actually start building up our wealth. Like, we're still wealth negative much later in our lives than any of our parents were, because they didn't have that debt leaning over them. They could afford to buy a house right after they got out of school, right when they got married, and then slowly accumulate that wealth that they can carry on generation after generation. So it's an issue we need to deal with so that we can all make better decisions, and the entire economy and our entire society will benefit from that.
Thank you, Dr. Harris.
No problem.
Aarya?
Yeah, so like I said, I'm in 11th grade at RGK High School, and I personally know the immense lack of financial literacy in the youth. Like before last March, financial classes were not even required at AK and most other public schools, so it gave students no incentives to take them really, because most people only want to take classes if they're honors or AP, or if it'll help them themselves. And if it's not required, then barely anyone would take them. But the thing is, many kids my age don't even understand the importance of financial literacy. For example, many kids my age don't even know how to write a check or how to fill out taxes when they're older, and some don't even know what a mortgage is. And the sad reality is, if we don't start to educate the youth on financial literacy, then many of them will fail at doing normal adult responsibilities in the future. And these are the simple responsibilities, so in the future when it comes harder tasks, it's going to be so impossible for them to tackle these tasks. So now, since we are excited that financial classes are mandatory from this year, Ms. Delahara, could you please elaborate more on it? What is the excitement with the teachers, parents, and students about these classes? What are some of the challenges that come with these classes? What courses will be eliminated or condensed? As Mr. Harris was saying, some American history course could be taken out. And are the classes going through are there going to be prerequisites to the class, or are they just going to be a semester or all year long class? And if you do know, like, what content would be planned to be included in the syllabus throughout the year or semester? And we just like to know the information so we can provide it. So just for the implementation of the financial education, like from the government overall, is the NC Public Schools.
Yeah, absolutely. These are great questions. Thank you so much. And thank you all for inviting me to join you this evening. It's a true pleasure to be with you. So I do want to clarify a bit that there was some economics that was taught in our previous history layout that included a class known as civics and economic literacy. And then there's certain elements of financial literacy that are sort of taught, in different grades along the way, but nothing like this new course that was mandated through the legislation that Representative Harris spoke about, which is quite revolutionary, I understand, because this is a full credit class. And I say that because apparently a lot of states had moved to just have a half a credit as far as a graduation requirement. And North Carolina decided to make it a full credit course. So, and we'll talk a little bit. In fact, I'm going to drop, for anyone that might want to look later when I mention the standards, I just dropped them in the chat if anyone would like to see them for reference. But because it's quite comprehensive, and to all the points that that you've all already made, it's quite necessary that we have this education. So I do want to reiterate that this is the first year that it is an option for all of our ninth graders this year, and I have a ninth grade son, so anyone who's in ninth grade or below will now get this newly mandated course at some point. What the state did not do, the State Board of Education, I should say, is they didn't say it has to be taken in ninth grade or it has to be taken in 11th grade. And that's actually a good thing for us locally, because graduation requirements and all the mandated classes can get quite restrictive, and there's just not a lot of space to move things around. So I say that to say that Myers Park High School is the only high school this year that chose to go ahead and start it with an offering for their ninth graders, but we completely expect that to be picked up in great volume next year, with most of the schools offering it for ninth or 10th graders, depending on their schedules. The new course is called Economics and Personal Finance, and it's broken down into 4 main categories. And again, if you happen to click on the standards, if you wanted to see them, you can see it's income and education, money and credit management, financial planning, and then critical consumerism, and also what I like to call fraud that's in there, which I do think is important. And Representative Harris already spoke to that also about, being careful getting all these credit card offers first thing out of high school. So there's a lot of good information there. It really is comprehensive. I mean, you go from different things like some basic economic ideas like supply and demand, to identifying the cost of post-secondary education and potential increase in income from career of choice. That's another standard. And I know that Representative Harris already talked about that, those critical decisions that you have to make and thinking about your post-secondary education or what career choices are there. There are certain just really useful tactical things like explaining how payroll deductions modify an employee's disposable income. That's one of the standards. And you just think about how valuable that is, because a lot of people show up for their first job even, and they don't know how to fill out the forms to take out the deductions. That's going to make sense for them, given, where they are in their life and if they're married and things like that. So it affects their tax refund or them paying at the end of the year. So I really like that about the course, because there are just some basic things like that everyone needs to know, including, how to write a check and some of the other things that we talked about today. There's Some of the standards include things like identifying factors like your income and your budget and cost of living and how to go about financial planning. So when you get to a point, hopefully, that you could have some extra disposable income, how do you go about then investing and what would make sense? And then, as I said before, toward the end, critical consumerism and fraud. And those are just some. I just chose a few that I kind of stuck out to me as interesting and as an overview, just to help the listeners here have an idea of the type of course that it is. I do want to point out that kind of the process, because I think this is important, because many times people do look to us locally at CMS and ask, well, what are you doing for financial literacy? And certainly now I've told you our implementation process with Myers Park, but it is important that we understand all the pieces too, I think, if you don't mind. Certainly Representative Harris spoke about the actual legislation being passed. Then that gets sent to DPI, which is our Department of Public Instruction, and they come up with the standards that you see posted in the chat after the State Board of Education approves them. So there's a lot of different players that are mixed into that make that hopeful, well-rounded decision, and then it gets pushed out to us, and then we respond by buying curriculum and different resources and things like that to be able to be prepared to deliver on the state's demands. I think there's a lot of excitement. You asked the question about how the teachers are feeling. I mean, many of our teachers this past summer went to a training that was virtual, but they were, the feedback that I heard, because I inquired, was that they were very pleased with the professional development they received from the North Carolina Council on Economic Education. And of course, as we've all mentioned, this is very necessary. So I think in just the sense that teachers, parents, students understand and want it, that it will, be a big success in that sense. So I think there's a lot of excitement for the course, and we'll just probably have even more feedback next year on how it's going and how we can, of course, continue to make it better. And, maybe we can get your feedback, Aarya. We can have you sneak in and observe a class and give some feedback on what you think it may still need. You mentioned kind of what might be compromised or lost or condensed. I can't remember the word that you used. And I do think it's important to just take a moment because I would agree with Representative Harris that maybe there was a better place for it to be placed. I think he said maybe vocational studies instead of history. I am kind of a history buff myself. And so while I love the idea of having the financial literacy class, I think that we always need more history. So I am a little concerned about the impact that will have. And the reason that I can't speak to the impact it's already had as far as the implementation and our delivery is because the new standard course of study for history has not been finalized. And in fact, if anyone cares, when this is over, go, feel free to do some Google searches and you can find some of the history on what's happened here in the past since the summer, and even some recent comments just last month with some concerns over where we are, because we took American History 1 and American History 2 and now just making one American History course. And as you can imagine, well, what does that leave out? And again, I should say, in 8th grade even, you get American history. It's not that you never are exposed to American history, but some very specific things came out, such as suggestions that the American history course standards be taught starting with 1776, which received a lot of pushback that I would agree with, that wouldn't necessarily be the way we want to tell our nation's history, because it excludes the Native Americans, it excludes the Spanish arriving to the shores, and it excludes also the first colonies, and of course 1619 with the arrival of the first enslaved peoples, and how that impacts not just our nation, but I would also say impacts directly how we view our finances in our nation. As far as what's the history, I think there's a direct connection that we can't miss there, because when we talk about legacies of money and who has money and how wealth was built, by excluding the story of slavery, I just think we miss a big chunk that's really, really key into understanding things in modern terms as well. And so I would invite people to follow that conversation along. They were supposed to have already approved those, but there was pushback, and DPI is currently redoing those standards, and the state board has indicated that they will approve them at the first of the year, as possibly as early as January, but maybe as late as March. And oftentimes they do take public comment for that. And so if you follow along, and you can certainly reach out to me and I can help you find the right spot to follow along. If you are interested in commenting on those standards, I think the more people that we have engaged in that process and understanding what's going on in Raleigh in general with regards to what we study and what we don't study, I think is always a great civic engagement activity. So I think I answered most of your questions there. Certainly let me know if there were others that I missed, but we're very excited at CMS to have this course, and for all the reasons that have already been mentioned, have a new focus on financial literacy.
Yes, Jennifer. Financial education is also important, as well as history. And financial education as part of school's curriculum is so vital to a successful life. When financial literacy is taught in school, students learn this foundational skill at the critical time as they are just beginning to manage their own money. This means they are interested and involved in learning how to deal with money in the best way possible. Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah.
Cynthia Bush, what have you noticed in the college students' preparedness for financial classes? Do you think that students should have been taught basics of finance in the schools to understand and perform well to succeed in college and life? If yes, why so?
Oh boy, I could go on for days. But, well, first of all, thank you everyone for inviting me to spend some time with you this evening to discuss this very important topic around financial literacy. And I guess, let me just throw out some rhetorical questions first. So who would hand the average 18-year-old $250,000 and expect them to spend it wisely? And then who would lend the average 18-year-old $250,000 and expect them to spend it wisely? And those questions seem a little absurd, but that's basically what happens with millions of high school graduates when they go off to college. And according to Forbes magazine in their October 2019 publication, about 70% of millennials had to borrow money to fund their bachelor's degrees. And the number is expected to be even higher for your Gen Zs. So you have high school graduates going to private universities who may have to borrow in excess of $60,000 a year to pay for it. $60,000. Multiply that by 4, it's almost $250,000. And then those who are going to public universities, as was referenced earlier, so they typically would have a cheaper bill, but they may still have to borrow in excess of $20,000 a year. So if they go 4 years, that's $80,000. If they take a little longer and go 5, there's $100,000. So we have kids, and I'm going to use that word, we also sometimes call them adults in training, who at a very young age are borrowing astronomical sums of money and expected to be able to use it wisely and then somehow be able to repay it just as wisely. So let me throw out some stats. The Trellis Company surveyed college students last year about their ability to manage finances. 38% of them responded to this survey. Of those who responded, almost 60% of them said they are uncomfortable with how much money they had to borrow and have very little confidence in their ability to repay it. And then in addition to that, 60% of the students who responded to the survey also said they could not come up with $500 in cash or credit if there was an emergency. So basically, these kids don't have emergency funds. And as we all know in life, emergencies do happen. And so having robust emergency funds is very critical to your financial well-being. A few more stats. Deepika, you referenced FINRA earlier. They surveyed 25,000 Americans about their finances and reported the results last year. And only 18% of the 18 to 24-year-olds who answered the survey could correctly answer 3 of only 5 basic financial literacy questions. So if we put that another way, 80% of them answered the majority of those 5 basic financial literacy questions incorrectly. So really, you may be asking yourself, okay, well, why is that relevant to us, right? Well, let's think about it this way. Financially illiterate kids and financially illiterate college students tend to grow up to be financially illiterate adults. So, is anyone surprised? For the North Carolina residents who answered that exact same FINRA survey, the majority of them said that they lack a rainy day fund. And only 1/3 of those North Carolina adults who responded to that survey could answer the majority of those 5 basic financial literacy questions correctly. So as Jennifer and Representative Harris mentioned, they were talking about incorporating financial education in K through 12, and I'm really proud of our state for being one of the 21 US states that's now requiring some form of financial literacy for K through 12. It's a great start, but we got to keep going. I mean, and when I think about it, I'm like, we require our kids to take math classes almost every single year in K through 12. Which makes sense, right? Because we want them to have a solid foundation in math. So having these same kids take 1 or maybe 2 courses in financial literacy over 12 years, it's a start, but really, we need to go a lot further than that. And really, for the concepts to take hold, and this is true in education in general, you need to introduce the concepts, you need to have them practice the concepts, you need to have them do the concepts repeatedly over time for it to really then take hold in their daily lives. So people who are better educated about finance, really they make more appropriate financial decisions, which can then improve their financial health and well-being, okay? But it actually goes deeper than that, because better financial health results in significantly less mental stress, which then results in healthier physical condition, as well as the ability to be able to afford important things like medical care. So, managing personal finances can be challenging, and it does require some knowledge about how you can definitely manage your personal resources, and you need to have some skill about where to go to get additional information and make good decisions. But it doesn't require a college degree. And so I'll now share a personal story. One of the smartest people I know around finances was my grandmother. And she was the product of the Deep South, where at the time, it was really common for families to pull their kids out of school and send them to work full time so that they could help put food on the table. So my grandmother couldn't finish the 8th grade. And when she got married, her husband hadn't finished the 5th grade. So they ended up, fortunately for them, escaping, making their way north, where he got a job in a steel mill, and they were able to start to save and basically put their personal situation on a more stable footing as it relates to finances. And then when I think about what they accomplished, one with a 5th grade education the other with not even finishing the 8th grade, they were the first in our family to invest in the stock market. They were one of the first in our family to be able to afford to buy their own home. They were one of the first in our family who left financial assets upon their deaths. So it doesn't take a whole lot of, book knowledge and highfalutin degrees and all of this to improve financial literacy. It really just takes commitment. And really, so that's what I'm hoping, is that we here who are gathered here today can take our commitment about how important this is and go out and continue to educate our communities about it and really help boost everybody's financial literacy. Any questions for me, Topeka, or anybody?
I agree, Cynthia. Being financially literate enables you to make smarter money management decisions that lead directly to a financially secure future, one that protects the asset built by you and your loved ones. Thank you, Ms. Bush.
No problem.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'd just like to say a couple things, like with what Ms. Bush said earlier. I definitely agree that we require math almost every year. It's from like kindergarten all the way up to senior year. And so as of now, we have, like you said, like 1 or 2, but we should definitely have more, even though we have it in like civics class. I definitely think we should have like a specific class, so it's more particular for financial management. And then what Ms. Delahara said earlier, I also agree with, because like history classes are very, very important, especially U.S. history, and for like even younger kids up to all the way to junior and senior year. Like, it's important for kids to know of our own culture and history, and we never want the bad parts of history to repeat itself. And for that to happen, many kids need to be informed and educated on these certain topics. And I would also definitely like to take you up on your offer, Ms. Delahara, to sit in on one of those classes. So thank you for that. So I would like to end by giving a big thank you to all the guest speakers. I know for a fact I learned so much today, and I learned so much valuable information. I would also like to give a big special thank you to my mom for creating and organizing this event. Hopefully we have many more successful events like this in the future. I would also like to thank to all the participants for joining us together. And if you could, please stay connected with Raise through the Facebook page for our upcoming session, which is on November 10th, and it's going to be on the topic of the finance management, but for medical expenses. And so thank you all, and thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you.
Delahara. Thank you, Cynthia Bush. Thank you, Dr. Harris. And thank you all our participants for joining us tonight with us. Thank you so much.
Bye.